That's cool.
Is that about right?
Cool. No, that ain't right.
No. Something similar to that, no.
We just up in Telluride.
Clint Eastwood, a name that has become a Hollywood legend, the man who captivated millions of audiences with his steely gaze, reserved smile, and unparalleled charisma in timeless cowboy films. He is not just an actor, but also a director, producer, a living monument, and a symbol of strength and heroism on the silver screen. But do you still remember him? Today, Clint Eastwood has reached an age many refer to as the final stretch of life. His current existence is a stark contrast to the dazzling glory of his past. From being one of the most sought-after stars, he now faces solitude, the marks of aging, and unforeseen personal upheavals. Behind Hollywood's glamorous curtain lies a truth about Clint Eastwood's present life that is tinged with sadness, even tragedy. What has led a man who once stood at the pinnacle of cinematic power to live so quietly and burdened with emotions today? In this video, we will uncover the answers. A story that will undoubtedly leave you shivering, moved, and more astonished than ever. Clint Eastwood. The very name resonates like a thunderclap across the history of Hollywood, evoking the image of a man who has become more than just a movie star. He is a cultural symbol, a myth, a storyteller who has shaped the very DNA of American cinema. Yet behind the legend lies a life story that reads almost like one of his films. A tale of hardship, resilience, and an unyielding will to survive and succeed. Born in 1930 in San Francisco, Eastwood entered a world still reeling from the Great Depression. His family lineage was a mosaic of European roots, and his upbringing reflected the restless spirit of those times. His father, an industrial worker by trade, was often forced to pack up the family and move in search of steady employment. For young Clint, this nomadic existence meant instability, constant change, and the struggle to carve out a sense of belonging. The family finally found firmer ground in California, a state whose landscapes and culture would one day become deeply entwined with Eastwood's cinematic identity. What is striking about Eastwood's early years is how far removed they seemed from the refined world of Hollywood. He was never the shining star in a classroom, nor the teacher's favorite. In fact, he often struggled academically and showed little interest in traditional studies. Instead, Clint gravitated toward more visceral passions: the hum of an engine, the exhilaration of sports, the rhythm of jazz and blues drifting from smoky bars. These interests, seemingly ordinary at the time, would later feed into his on-screen persona, the rugged outsider who followed his own rules and lived life on his own terms. Before fame ever glanced his way, Eastwood's life was a patchwork of odd jobs. He worked as a lifeguard, cutting through the saltwater waves with sharp precision. He spent time as a lumberjack, his body tested by the unforgiving bite of physical labor. And he even played piano in bars, filling dimly lit rooms with melodies that earned him just enough to get by. These were not glamorous pursuits, but they instilled in him a toughness, a resourcefulness, and an appreciation for the unvarnished realities of life, qualities that would become hallmarks of his acting and directing style. But perhaps the most defining event of his young life came not in California, not in a bar or a lumberyard, but high above the Pacific Ocean in 1951. Drafted into the U.S. Army during the Korean War era, Eastwood was on a military aircraft when disaster struck. The plane malfunctioned and went down, plunging into the icy waters off the California coast. What followed was a test of raw survival. Eastwood, then just 21 years old, found himself stranded in open water. For hours he swam, pushing against the current, his body freezing, his mind locked on the single goal of reaching shore alive. Many would have succumbed to exhaustion or panic, but Eastwood endured. His successful escape from the jaws of death was nothing short of extraordinary, a true foreshadowing of the man he was becoming. That harrowing experience would remain etched into his memory, shaping his worldview and, in time, his artistry. If the 1950s and 1960s shaped Clint Eastwood into the man he would become, then the decades that followed transformed him into the legend we know today. Hollywood, in all its glitter and grit, finally opened its gates to this unlikely hero, a man who carried the scars of survival and the soul of a wanderer. By the 1970s, Eastwood had ascended to a place few could ever dream of, straddling the delicate line between icon and myth. It was during this era that one of cinema's most enduring archetypes was born: Dirty Harry. With his .44 Magnum revolver and his icy stare, Inspector Harry Callahan was not just another movie cop. He was the embodiment of raw justice. Unapologetic, unpolished, and unafraid of crossing lines that polite society hesitated to acknowledge. Eastwood infused the character with a moral ambiguity that unsettled critics but electrified audiences. Harry was neither saint nor villain. He was the man who asked uncomfortable questions in a turbulent America grappling with crime, corruption, and social upheaval. For many, Eastwood wasn't simply playing a role. He was holding up a mirror to a nation. Yet Eastwood was never one to remain confined within a single persona. While Dirty Harry cemented his place in the pantheon of American pop culture, he startled audiences with a wholly unexpected turn. Starring alongside an orangutan named Clyde in the quirky comedies Every Which Way But Loose, 1978, and Any Which Way You Can, 1980. Imagine the man who made criminals tremble now trading punches with bikers, cracking jokes, and sharing screen time with a cheeky primate. Critics scoffed, but audiences flocked to the theaters. The films became unlikely hits, proving that Eastwood was not afraid to gamble with his image, or to laugh at it. But as in any great story, triumph was shadowed by tragedy. In 1975, while filming The Eiger Sanction, disaster struck when a stuntman lost his life during a dangerous mountain climbing sequence. Eastwood, who had always valued authenticity in his work, was devastated. Those close to him say he carried the weight of that loss for years, often questioning whether the relentless pursuit of realism was worth such a terrible price. In private moments, he reportedly confessed that the accident haunted him, a stark reminder that behind the screen's illusions lay very real risks. It was one of the few times the indomitable Eastwood seemed shaken, his stoic facade pierced by grief. The 1980s and 1990s marked a shift, not just in Eastwood's career, but in his artistry. His characters grew darker, more introspective, layered with regrets and contradictions. The gunslinger's squint now carried the weight of history. The lawman's glare revealed shades of doubt. Nowhere was this evolution more evident than in Unforgiven, 1992. In what many consider his magnum opus, Eastwood crafted a revisionist Western that dismantled the very mythology he had once helped build. Playing William Money, a retired killer drawn back into violence, he offered a sobering meditation on justice, mortality, and the corrosive cost of violence. Unforgiven was not just a film, it was a reckoning. It earned Eastwood 2 Academy Awards for Best Director and Best Picture, and elevated him from Hollywood star to cinematic auteur. At the Oscars, as he stood clutching the golden statue, many saw a man vindicated, no longer just the face of American masculinity, but a thinker, a craftsman, a philosopher of film. If Dirty Harry made Eastwood a legend, Unforgiven made him immortal. And still, he did not stop. As the 2000s unfolded, Eastwood embarked on a new chapter, one defined by maturity, vulnerability, and unexpected tenderness. In $1 Million Baby, 2004, he played Frankie Dunn, a grizzled boxing trainer whose gruff exterior concealed a well of compassion. The film was raw and heartbreaking, exploring themes of sacrifice and dignity in the face of tragedy. It earned him another pair of Oscars and reaffirmed his status as a master storyteller. Then came Gran Torino, 2008, where Eastwood once again stood at the center of America's cultural conversation. As Walt Kowalski, a bitter, aging war veteran, he delivered a performance both scathing and soulful. The film, with its meditation on prejudice, redemption, and human connection, resonated deeply across generations. Audiences recognized the parallels between Eastwood himself and his character. Both were men marked by time, gruff on the surface, but at their core, driven by a search for meaning. In Cry Macho, 2021, long after most of his contemporaries had stepped away from the limelight, Eastwood returned yet again. this time as an aging cowboy on a journey of redemption. The film was quieter, more fragile, yet profoundly Eastwood. A meditation on the twilight of life, the mistakes that haunt us, and the fragile hope that still flickers in old age. Some critics questioned whether he should still be acting at 91. But for Eastwood, the answer was simple. Storytelling was not a career, but a calling, one he would follow until his final breath. What makes Clint Eastwood's career so remarkable is not just its longevity, but its audacity. He has been, at various points, the ruthless cop, the laconic gunslinger, the comedic adventurer, the weary mentor, and the contemplative director. He has made films that thrilled audiences, challenged conventions, and, at times, provoked uncomfortable debates. He has dared to reinvent himself again and again, never content with the safety of a single identity. If Clint Eastwood's professional life reads like a carefully crafted script of triumph and reinvention, then his personal life is more akin to a sprawling, unpredictable novel, one filled with passion, scandal, heartbreak, and redemption. For decades, Eastwood has fascinated the public not only as an actor and filmmaker, but as a man whose romantic entanglements often rivaled the drama of his films. Where his career showed discipline and precision, his love life was messy, tangled, and at times dangerously close to unraveling the carefully built image of Hollywood's tough guy. Eastwood's reputation as a ladies' man began early, long before he became a household name. With his tall frame, piercing gaze, and an air of effortless confidence, he drew attention wherever he went. Crew members on early film sets whispered about his charm, and actresses who worked alongside him often admitted, sometimes years later, that resisting Clint's magnetism was nearly impossible. His first marriage to Maggie Johnson in 1953 came at a time when he was still struggling to break into Hollywood. Maggie was devoted, patient, and supportive, standing by his side as he hustled for small roles and endured rejection after rejection. Yet even in those lean years, rumors swirled of Eastwood's wandering eye. As his star began to rise in the 1960s, so too did the complications in his personal life. He embarked on affairs that became the stuff of tabloid legend. One liaison with actress Roxanne Tunis reportedly lasted more than a decade, producing a daughter whose existence remained hidden from the public for years. Friends recall Eastwood juggling sets, premieres, and secret rendezvous with an almost reckless confidence, as if he believed he could outmaneuver not only the press, but fate itself. By the 1970s and 1980s, his personal life had grown as layered and complicated as his on-screen characters. Eastwood fathered multiple children with different partners, some relationships overlapping, others ending in bitterness and legal disputes. Courtrooms occasionally became battlegrounds where ex-lovers sought recognition, support, or justice. Headlines painted him as both irresistible and irresponsible, a man who thrived in the spotlight but stumbled in the shadows. One gossip columnist once quipped, "Clint Eastwood doesn't just make movies. He leaves sequels in real life." And yet, beneath the scandals, there were stories of tenderness. During the filming of The Outlaw Josie Wales, Eastwood grew close to actress Sandra Locke, a relationship that would span over a decade. Their bond was intense, creative, and often volatile. Locke later described their time together as both exhilarating and suffocating, a romance that felt larger than life but carried heavy costs. She accused him of betrayal and manipulation, and their breakup played out like a Hollywood melodrama. Lawsuits, tell-all books, and wounds that seemed slow to heal. Still, Eastwood never stopped searching for connection, even as the years piled on. His relationships with Jocelyn Reeves, Frances Fisher, and later Dina Ruiz, all of whom bore children with him, added more chapters to his already complex family story. At times, it seemed as if Eastwood, the director who orchestrated every frame with meticulous control, was incapable of directing the chaos of his own personal relationships. The result was a sprawling, unconventional family tree. At least 8 children, born of different mothers, each carrying the Eastwood name yet often growing up in different corners of the world. Some of his children discovered their siblings later in life, piecing together the puzzle of their father's secretive past. Imagine the dinner table reunions, A constellation of personalities, some estranged, others eager to forge bonds, all tied to the same legendary figure. For years, whispers of estrangement colored the tabloids, sons and daughters struggling to reconcile with the myth and the man, grappling with his absence as much as his fame. But time, that most relentless of directors, eventually softened the edges. As Eastwood grew older, something shifted. Friends say that in his later years, he seemed less interested in the whirlwind of romance and more focused on reconciliation. Perhaps it was the wisdom of age, or perhaps the ghosts of his past had grown too heavy to ignore. Slowly, the distant father began to reemerge as a more present one. He attended family gatherings, made efforts to bridge divides, and allowed himself moments of vulnerability in front of the children who once knew him only as a mythic presence. And now we arrive at the present. Clint Eastwood at 93 years old. For many, the idea itself feels almost mythical, as if the man who once strode across dusty Western landscapes and stalked grim city streets should have remained frozen in cinematic time. Yet here he is, very much alive, very much himself, defying the expectations of age with the same quiet determination that has defined his entire journey. Observers are often astonished when they see him today. At an age when most would have long since retreated into frailty, Eastwood carries himself with a presence that still commands attention. His tall frame, though leaner, remains upright. His handshake, though weathered, still firm. Reporters who meet him often remark that his piercing eyes, the same eyes that once narrowed beneath the brim of a cowboy hat, still carry that electric charge of intensity. The secret, it seems, lies in his lifelong discipline. Eastwood has always lived by a personal code that balances rugged independence with quiet restraint. His diet is famously austere: lean proteins, plenty of vegetables, and an avoidance of excess sugar or alcohol. For decades, he has preached the philosophy of eating only until one is 80% full, a simple rule he borrowed from Asian traditions. Daily exercise remains non-negotiable. Neighbors in Carmel, California, say it is not unusual to see him walking briskly along the coastline at dawn, a solitary figure moving against the ocean breeze, headphones in, perhaps lost in old jazz tunes. In a world where indulgence and burnout often claim the brightest stars, Eastwood's steady discipline has kept him standing when so many of his peers have long since faded. And remarkably, he is not finished. Even in his 10th decade of life, Clint Eastwood refuses to retire. His latest project, Juror Number 2, has drawn both astonishment and admiration. Industry insiders whisper about the long hours he still keeps on set, how he watches every scene with the eye of a hawk, never raising his voice, but commanding absolute focus through his very presence. Crew members, many young enough to be his grandchildren, speak of the surreal experience of working for a man who has been part of Hollywood since the Eisenhower presidency. "He doesn't direct with words," one assistant reportedly said. "He directs with silence, with a look, with that Eastwood aura. Everyone knows when he's pleased, and everyone knows when he isn't." Earlier this year, Eastwood made a rare public appearance that reminded the world why his legacy endures. At a conservation event in Los Angeles, he stood beside Jane Goodall, the legendary primatologist, to advocate for wildlife preservation. The sight was both surprising and moving, two icons from entirely different worlds, cinema and science, united by a shared reverence for life. The cameras captured Eastwood smiling, his weathered face creased with age but radiant with vitality. Social media lit up with awe. Clint Eastwood at 93 looks stronger than men half his age. And yet, behind the extraordinary vitality lies a quieter, more somber reality. Eastwood's life today is marked by long stretches of solitude. He spends much of his time at his beloved Carmel estate, a sanctuary overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Friends say the house is filled with mementos, photographs from film sets, awards tucked discreetly on shelves, framed posters of Dirty Harry, Unforgiven, and $1 Million Baby. The grand piano remains a centerpiece of the home, and on some evenings when the fog rolls in over the coast, Eastwood sits alone at the keys, letting his fingers drift into melodies of jazz standards. Music, as it was in his youth, is still his most faithful companion. Loneliness, however, has become an uninvited guest. For all his children and grandchildren, for all the visitors and admirers, Eastwood now moves through days that are quieter than they once were. The man who once commanded entire film crews, who held the rapt attention of millions, now often walks his garden in silence. He tends to the roses, listens to the gulls, and sometimes gazes at the horizon for long stretches, as if searching for the next scene in a story that has yet to end. A longtime friend described it poignantly. Clint doesn't fear death. What he fears is irrelevance. He's spent a lifetime making an impact, and now he's learning to live with the echo of his own legend. Still, there are moments of warmth. On holidays, the sprawling Eastwood clan gathers, children, grandchildren, partners, filling the Carmel estate with laughter. Photographs occasionally leak to the press. Clint smiling with his daughters, holding a grandchild, or toasting quietly at the dinner table. These snapshots tell a story different from the tabloids of decades past. Here, finally, is a man who seems at peace with his mistakes, who has chosen to measure his life not by box office numbers, but by the presence of family at his side. Perhaps the most telling image of Clint Eastwood today is not one of red carpets or cameras, but of mornings in Carmel. Picture it, the Pacific stretching endlessly before him, the salt air bracing against his skin, and Eastwood, hands in his pockets, hat pulled low, walking the shoreline as if he were still the lone gunslinger, only now facing the vastness of time instead of the outlaws of the West. His pace may be slower, but his spirit remains unbroken. At 93, Clint Eastwood is living proof that legends do not fade easily. They adapt, they endure, they carry their scars and solitude with dignity. For Eastwood, the twilight years are not a coda, but another act in a life that has never followed a predictable script. Still strong, still working, still searching for meaning, Clint Eastwood stands as both man and myth, reminding us that even as the curtain draws near, the story is far from over. And so, the story of Clint Eastwood comes full circle. From a boy who once swam for his life in the icy waters of the Pacific, to a man who stood atop Hollywood as both actor and director, to a nonagenarian who still wakes each morning with purpose, his life is nothing short of cinematic. Eastwood has lived through eras, reinvented himself time and again, and in doing so, has given us not only unforgettable films, but also a living lesson in resilience. What makes Eastwood's journey extraordinary is not merely his fame, nor the awards that line his shelves, but the contradictions he has embodied. He has been both hero and anti-hero, both lover and loner, both flawed man and timeless legend. His life reminds us that greatness is never a straight line. It is carved out of mistakes, risks, triumphs, and regrets. For every Dirty Harry or Unforgiven that cemented his legend, there were scandals and shadows that revealed his humanity. And perhaps that is why Clint Eastwood endures. Because he is not just a star, but a man whose life reflects the messy, beautiful, painful, and inspiring truth of being human. At 93, his world is quieter, less dazzling, but no less meaningful. Friends imagine him in Carmel, sitting by the fire as the Pacific roars outside, a script resting on the table, a piano nearby waiting for his hands to find their way back to a melody. It is a quieter stage now, one without box office numbers or flashing cameras, but it may be the most honest act of his life. In these moments, Eastwood is no longer chasing stardom. He is simply chasing time, savoring what remains with the same stubborn will that carried him through every storm. And here lies the lesson for us all, that passion has no expiration date, that discipline can outlast decades, and that even in solitude, there can be strength. Eastwood has shown that true power lies not in the roar of the crowd, but in the ability to keep going long after the world has counted you out. And now, it's your turn. If Clint Eastwood's films have touched you, if you've ever found yourself inspired by his characters or his journey, share your memories in the comments below. Which of his roles left the deepest impression on you? Which moment in his career do you carry with you? We want to hear your stories, and don't forget, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to our channel. More legendary tales await. Stories of stars who, like Eastwood, have defied time, reinvented themselves, and left behind legacies that still echo across generations. Because in the end, Hollywood is not just about movies. It is about the people who dare to live like Clint Eastwood, boldly, imperfectly, and without ever surrendering to time.